I just got home, my back door is kicked in, and my girl ain't answering the phone.
Okay, what's your name?
My name's Christopher Jackson. My son's inside with her and everything. I'm about to go in and see what is going on.
Okay, why don't you just wait for officers? I'll get them over there.
All right, thank you.
When officers arrived on scene, they saw Christopher Jackson standing in the driveway. He reported that he had just arrived home from working the overnight shift and found that his back door was kicked open. He was upset, very anxious.
Chris stated that his fiancée, Angela, was inside the house, and also their young son, he believed was still in the house.
You could just see the look on Chris's face, that he knew something was wrong and he was fearing the worst.
The officers found the back door of the house. It appeared to be kicked in. There was a noticeable boot print on the white door. The door frame itself was fractured, broken, splintered.
There were 4 of us that went inside. We don't know what's going on in there. We don't know if someone's being held hostage. We don't know if someone's waiting around the corner. So we just went room by room.
The officers made their way into a living room area. They did not notice anything that would be considered out of the ordinary. It was fairly clean and picked up.
They went down the hallway where they found 2 bedrooms. One was locked. They searched the other room across the hall, and that's where they found the young child inside of his crib. He appeared to have been sleeping. He wasn't harmed. He seemed in good condition. One of the officers picked up the child and took him outside and brought him to his father.
He was relieved to see that his child was unharmed, but that very quickly changed to concern about why isn't Angela out?
After that was completed is when we prepared to enter through the locked door. I stood next to the door while another officer kicked the door open.
They could see a large bed, and as you walked in, you could immediately see that there was blood on the bed, and there appeared to be somewhat of a scuffle.
As I turned the corner between the bed and the wall, I saw a younger white female laying on the floor. She was laying on her back, appeared to be wearing sleeping clothes covered in blood. It became apparent that she had suffered multiple stab wounds.
They were able to determine that the victim was Angela Wilder and that she was in fact deceased.
Angela grew up in Alabama. She was very Southern, always nice, always polite. I don't think there was one time where she didn't call me Miss Crystal. She ended up in Minot, North Dakota, and that's where I met her in nursing school. She had a full scholarship for nursing. It was like fulfilling a dream. She liked interior decorating. I said, the only thing I have hanging on my walls is a clock. And she said, I could totally come over and help you figure out where to hang all your pictures. She always talked about how Chris was so sweet and he took the brunt of a lot of the household things because she was so busy with nursing school. She always said nice, wonderful things about him and her children. She did talk about her kids a lot and how much she loved them. She had so much more than just a bright future ahead of her. She had her children's lives to watch them grow up, and that was all taken away from her.
When they looked at Angela's body, they could see blood coagulating behind her head on the floor and on the back of her neck, which told us that she had been dead at least some hours.
It appeared there may have been some possible DNA underneath her fingernails. It appeared that she may have scratched or at least fought briefly with her attacker. So they collected swabs.
With the amount of times that she was stabbed, we definitely knew that whoever attacked Angela had anger and definitely wanted her dead. It did raise a red flag to me that Christopher Jackson did not go into the home when he initially arrived home that morning. We all feel the first thing we would do would be rush in and check on our loved ones. So at this point, we told him we wanted to speak to him and asked him to voluntarily come down to the police department.
There's some water just in case. I don't know if you need anything or not. I don't have it at home. Where do you work at?
Walmart.
Walmart? Okay. What do you do at Walmart?
Stock.
Okay. What are the hours for that?
My hours are like 10 to 7.
Okay. So you go into work at 10. Does she give you a ride to work then?
Yeah.
Okay. So walk me through what happened this morning.
I always call her on break.
Okay.
Just to see how she's doing. Just to talk to her.
Mm-hmm.
Because I work nights.
What time's break?
Break is 5.
Did you call her at 5?
Yeah.
Okay. And how did that call go?
It didn't. I figured, okay, she's just tired. But she always picks up whenever I call her.
What time does she usually pick you up from work?
She's usually there about 7, and she's not out there this morning. And I keep calling her. And she's not picking up the phone. So I call a taxi, I get to the house, so I walk around back, and the door is open. And something in my stomach just felt wrong. So I called the cops. And ambulance comes. The guys go in, and they come back out. And there's still no Angela.
Looking at Chris, the way he's sitting right there, he's pretty open. It's not like he's trying to hide anything. He's not crossed legs, not crossed arms. He seemed genuinely hurt in that and heartbroken at that point.
Was Angela working at the time?
No, she just got into nursing.
You guys argue?
Oh yeah, of course, we're in a relationship.
Oh, so when you're home, you guys leave the doors unlocked?
Except for the front door and the back door. Always leave them locked.
How is your relationship now with Angela?
Oh, it was very stable.
Okay.
We went up to Billings like earlier this week because she was excited because she got a pregnancy test.
So Angela was pregnant?
She was trying to keep it a secret from me for Christmas. She kind of glowed a little bit, so.
I could tell by the way he talked about Angela that he really did love her. His reactions, his emotions, everything seemed very appropriate. I had no evidence that led us to believe that there was anything toxic in his relationship with Angela.
My initial gut feeling at that point was that he probably was not the one who murdered Angela.
What's your guys' typical evening like before you go to work?
Door's shut, nothing seems out of place. You walk by the front window, in between the blinds.
Have any enemies?
There's people that might not like her, but I don't think anybody would be to that point.
I know that you said that the dispatcher told you not to go in the house, that officers were on their way. Did you go into the house?
Something in my stomach said not to.
Okay. So last time you were in the house was when you left for work last night?
Yes, ma'am.
Who would harm Angela if that's the case?
Richie.
Chris told us that Richie Wilder was Angela Wilder's ex-husband. They also shared a biological child together, as well as Angela's firstborn child was adopted by Richie while they were married, and they shared custody of the children.
What's her relationship like with Richie?
If you can name it, they've probably been through it. He doesn't like her, she doesn't like him. He was in the military and he got kicked out because he was beating the out of her and they got divorced over it.
Is he still living in Minot?
Yeah. We always had to take the kids up to Marketplace Foods Sunday at 5. And I go in there so Angela didn't have to.
Was Sunday the custody exchange then? Is that every week?
Every week.
Okay, has there been anything recent between the two of them? Any verbal, physical contact?
Dirty looks, scowls, bull back and forth.
Richie Wilder and Angela Wilder had a very volatile relationship. There was abuse that was documented. He had a motive for this crime with the custody of the children.
And at that point, it really put Richie on our radar as a person who we need to talk to.
That morning, I was driving to school and drove by her house, and her house was surrounded in yellow tape. I called, got no answer, texted right away, said, "Are you okay?" Got no answer. The next day, I learned that she was gone, that Angela was gone. It was an extreme shock. She was one of the most compassionate, caring people you'll ever meet. It was heartbreaking.
When's the last time you saw Richie?
Last Sunday.
The custody exchange then?
Yeah.
Okay.
We get there and Cindy's sitting over there in a friggin' Honda.
Who's Cindy?
Cindy's Richie's wife. Cindy sits there and scowls at us the entire time. I walk the kids in, tell them I love them and everything. Each time we get the kids back, it's always something about Richie said this or did that. It's always putting us down and just calling us trash.
Okay. I'm gonna step out for just a second. Do you need anything? And are you done with your water? Do you need some more? Okay, let me get you some more water.
Once we were done talking to him, he also agreed to take the polygraph, and he passed that.
We contacted his employer. We were able to get the video of all the cameras in the business. And we were able to confirm that Chris never left his job that night.
Mr. Jackson's alibi was solid. At that point, I was very confident that Christopher Jackson was innocent. So we definitely wanted to get Richie Wilder into the police department so we could see what his story is and see where he was at and see what he had to say about all of this.
Just right here is okay? Okay, good. Give me 1 second.
Oh, yes, sir. Yep.
Hello, hi, are you Richie?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Richie. My name is Detective Krista McNice, and Sergeant Detective Dave Goodman. I'm not sure what patrol told you or the officers told you when they came up to the house to get you.
I needed to come down and answer questions.
Did they tell you what about?
Well, I got some messages that they text, and then I saw on Facebook that something happened. I don't know. I know my wife, when she drove my to school today, She saw some cars out there.
When we sit out there, you're talking about
Maxwell's house.
that's
Angela's house.
Angela's
Yep,
house.
sorry.
Okay.
What happened to your face?
Right
You got
here?
a scratch in your
Yeah,
face.
that's from my kid.
Well, the first thing everybody noticed was he had a small scratch under one of his eyes, which appeared to be pretty fresh, which kind of hyped up everybody's senses right away. Somebody who was stabbed in a violent encounter more than likely struggled. Wouldn't be unrealistic to think that, they might have scratched their assailant.
Okay. And how did that happen?
We play wrestle/play fight. Sometimes he claws me up. He has long fingernails sometimes. So
When did that happen?
that happened yesterday.
And tell me about the scenario of what you guys were doing when that happened.
Oh, just in the living room. I usually get on my knees and we kind of play around.
And the thing I don't want to hear is usually.
Oh,
I mean, tell me exactly what happened.
Oh,
I could see his brain working when I asked him about the scratch. You could tell that he's uncomfortable explaining this, and he keeps falling back on a memory, I believe, of him wrestling with his son. And that was a huge red flag for us.
Okay. Did you work last night?
from 7 to 11, yes, ma'am.
And you were at Trinity that whole time?
Yes, sir. We can't leave the hospital without permission.
Where'd you go after you left work?
Straight home.
Can anybody tell us what time you got home?
Cindy?
Cindy can? Okay. Did you ever leave to go anywhere in the middle of the night?
No, ma'am.
Have you ever been inside her house?
No, sir.
Have you ever made statements to Angela about taking the kids away from her?
What did that cost between the two of you then? You consider yourself a smart man, Richie?
Depending on what it is.
You can certainly put two and two together, right?
Yes.
So what is the two and two that you've put together in this situation?
Well, somebody passed away. I know that. I just don't know who.
We're doing an investigation here, and obviously this is serious. We have you down
Yes.
here. And I'll tell you, Angela's dead. But what do you know about that?
Know about what?
About Angela being dead?
I think just what you said.
I'll tell you what, there's a lot of fingers pointing right at you.
Well, yeah. Because I'm her ex-husband, right?
Well, you're her ex-husband, and you guys have a volatile relationship.
Yeah.
Did you hurt her?
No.
Did you kill her?
No.
No?
No. I don't know anything about it.
Your DNA is not going to show up anywhere on her? Going to show up under her fingernails? Your DNA is not going to show up in her house?
No. I've never been to her house. And if I did, I would tell you.
If anybody ever accused me of something I didn't do, I'd be angry, but he was very calm and non-caring, just sits there quiet. It just didn't make much sense. You know, I try and think of people that would benefit from this. And again, it brings me back to you, but it also brings me to Cindy. I mean, it could be something maybe that Cindy's just tired of dealing with. All this pain in the ass custody. Do you think she killed Angela?
Not Cindy.
How confident are you on that?
100%.
Would you take a polygraph exam?
I mean, yeah, if I need to. I got in a high. I want to get to the bottom of it because I want to clear my name.
Okay.
You know.
Let's start with the polygraph. You'll be here at 8 o'clock tonight?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to grab a camera and just take some pictures of your scratch on your face. And we'd like to look through your phone and your vehicle and your wife's vehicle. Just put your hands straight out. Can you lift your shirt up for me? Sure. Where are you?
T-shirt and jeans. All right, now this is what the hand swab begins. Richie was high on our person of interest list at that point.
It was obvious that we had rattled his cage and that he was uncomfortable. I wanted him to understand that we're not going to go away. I wanted him to go home with that thought in his mind that he's in trouble.
She confirmed that, Richie came right home from work. She claimed that she woke up in the middle of the night. He was still in bed beside her. He was there all night. We suspected that she might have been covering for Richie, but she didn't seem all that concerned that Angela was dead and that she'd been murdered. It was just strange.
When the crime scene team processed the Honda Pilot, one of the crime scene officers located a small dot on the passenger door. It was dark brown in color and smaller than a pencil eraser.
It came back as human blood. So we sent the blood in for DNA testing.
At that point, it becomes a waiting game.
It just kind of all added up to just more and more suspicious. Shouldn't take that much effort to say, yeah, I'll do this if you're not involved. We're pretty well in agreement that this is our prime suspect. Every little piece we had was pointing right towards Richie Wilder. Richie worked in a local hospital, and they found out rather quickly that Richie was very popular with some of the female co-workers.
Richie was having affairs with different women throughout the hospital. He really wasn't the greatest guy when it came to how he would treat women, but that doesn't help us build our case against him as a murderer. We just have to keep following up on everything we can think of. About a month after the murder, we did receive a call from the North Dakota State Crime Lab. They told us that the swab taken from the Honda Pilot was Angela Wilder's blood. Finding Angela Wilder's blood in Cynthia Wilder's Honda Pilot was a huge break for us. It was a very emotional moment.
Angela's DNA should not have been in that vehicle. Ultimately, we got the DNA back from the fingernail scrapings of Angela that showed Richie's DNA underneath there. That was the breaking moment in this case. Took him to the police department, and Richie lawyered up. He wasn't going to talk to us anymore.
At this point, we highly suspected that she had information about the homicide. She lied during the first interview when she said that he didn't leave anywhere during the night. We knew that she was going to stick to her story, so we had to say something shocking that would change the course of that.
We have Richie down here. Do you know why we have Richie down here? We've arrested Richie for the murder of Angela Wilder. You tell me?
We want you to be honest with us this time.
I have nothing to say.
Cindy, we have a lot that we want to share with you too, stuff that I would think that you would want to know. I don't mean any disrespect by saying this, Cindy. I'm a little bit confused about your relationship with Richie. I know he's your husband, but I'll tell you what, you don't fit the criteria of the other women that he's sleeping with.
My
Not at all.
husband's not a cheater. Do not accuse him of that.
Oh, we don't
Oh, I
have
can
to
prove
accuse
that.
him, we have proof. This was Jennifer, and Jennifer told us about the sexual relationship she's had with Richie since the beginning of the year.
Well,
That's-
then that's awesome.
We're
Congratulations
not
to them.
trying to offend you or piss you off with that information.
Because I know it's not true.
We can play the recordings.
Know who this is?
No.
That's another one.
He's got relationships with all three of these women. And
Well, I want to see proof of that.
I've
Do you have
got-
it on video?
We have Joanne on video saying it.
I don't want to see a video of them saying. I want to see a video of them having sex with my husband. That's what I want.
Cindy,
I
now
don't
that's-
believe you until I see that. I trust my
Let me
husband
tell you something,
100%.
She's Steven in his phone.
Well, he is busy. He's very busy.
I don't give two.
I feel for you. And it's absolute bull that he had this whole other life.
My gut feeling right now, Cindy, is that this isn't fair to you. Richie did something horrible. And you know it. But it's time to be honest with us and tell us the truth. Why did he do it? Because he hates her? Because of money? Because of the children? Why?
I don't know anything else to say.
She was definitely playing the loyal wife, but I thought there was more to it, and I felt like she had information on how and when and what happened to clothing that might have had blood on it, and I wanted her to break.
Did you know that Angela was pregnant? She was. She was pregnant when Richie killed her.
Don't say that.
It's the
did.
truth. That's the evidence that we've
change
gathered.
What evidence?
It's scientific
What's the-
evidence.
We have DNA evidence that we took from the Honda. That we
Of
took
course,
off.
there would be Richie's
No, no.
DNA in my Honda.
Whose DNA shouldn't be in the Honda?
Whose blood should not be in the Honda?
Nobody's blood has ever been in the Honda.
Whose blood do you think was in the Honda?
I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you, Angela's blood. There's blood on the passenger door of that vehicle that belongs to Angela. How did that get there?
Well, I don't know why her blood would be on our door if she supposedly died in her house.
Because who killed her was in your car. That's all.
We want you to tell us what you know. That's why we're sharing these things. Because we know you know more. Were you with him when he did this?
What was that for?
Did he stay at the house at all that night?
Yes, he came home after work.
Okay. What time did he leave the house?
He didn't leave the house that
Yes,
night.
he did.
Didn't leave the house that night.
No, he didn't. I was up several times with the kids and he was out cold.
That's not true.
That's not true.
My goal here is just for you to be honest with us and tell us what you know. Are you going to tell us, Cindy?
I don't have anything to tell.
If you don't want to talk now, I beg of you to please reconsider and call us.
We highly suspected that Cynthia was involved in more ways than one, but we didn't have evidence against her at that point.
I never got a good feeling about Cynthia, but There's nothing we could charge her with at that time. And she was free to leave.
Richie wanted to give this information because he was looking for some sort of deal. So that's when we set up the interview to take place in the sheriff's office in their conference room.
All right, the video recorder's recording.
Start whenever you're ready.
Start.
Well, we understand that that you have some information that you want to share with us. And it's my understanding that you want to share your involvement in this crime, this homicide.
So Chris said he kind of came up with an idea to, like, where I could get full custody of my kids and he could get full custody of his. 'Cause I guess they were, having some issues. And I was like, okay, what do you want? And he said he thought that Angela was cheating on him. And he said when he goes to work that he thought somebody was coming over. He's like, we'll catch him in bed and then you can testify for me in court against her that she's cheating on me and then we both get full custody. So I was like, yeah, sure, you're going to help me, I'm going to help you. That sounds good to me. But he called me that night. He's like, why don't you come down and get me? And then, we'll head up and catch him in the act. So I got in the car, drove to Walmart, picked him up, drove back to his house. We got out of the car, he unlocked the door, we went in.
Tell me exactly what you saw when you went.
Oh, okay. We went up some stairs and then we went through a room that was like their bedroom. And it looked like there was two people in the bed, And so as he pulled back the cover, the first thing I noticed, there wasn't a person. That was a body pillow. But he grabbed her and he just started like making a motion. He just kept stabbing her. I ran over there. She leaned up and scratched the mess out of my face. She was just like, I love you. And he just started stabbing her more. And I was like, what the are you doing?
It was just the most far-fetched fantasy, I think. I mean, there's no other way to put it. At this point, he'd had several months of sitting in the jail to try to concoct a story. And when I heard it, I'm like, this is the best he could do, is Chris did it.
What did he say?
He just said, he's like, I'm serious. He's like, if you tell anybody, he's like, I'm gonna kill your wife, I'm gonna kill your little one.
Okay.
He never said their names, he just kept saying your wife and your little one.
I know from your admission that you were there. But it doesn't fit. Because I know that Chris did not leave Walmart during the hours that you say that he did.
He did though.
I know he didn't because I watched him on video. I watched him at work.
I didn't kill anybody.
I think you killed Angela.
Yeah, I told you Chris did.
You can stop anytime you want.
Stop.
Okay. I appreciate you talking to us.
We were preparing with the idea that Richie Wilder was going to lie to us. Our plan was to let him tell his story and just let those lies bury him. There was so much that he locked himself into, describing the inside of the house, describing how Angela's body was. We won this little battle in this entire war of a case.
This afternoon, the jury convicted Richie Wilder of murdering his ex-wife Angela in her Northwest Minot home last November.
Richie's current wife, Cynthia, remained resolute in her husband's innocence.
I stand by him.
We can't ask for a better sentence than life without parole, so we were happy with that.
It's almost like we know she did something, but we just can't prove it. Cynthia went about her life at that point. So that's the frustrating part, because you know that there's more.
The Minot Police Department received a call in March of 2017 from a Matt Walters.
He'd said that he has possible information about the murder of Angela Wilder.
We called him just to see if this was really true.
Good afternoon. Is this Matt?
This is.
Matt, Detective Matthijs calling from the Minot Police Department. Some information was passed along to me. I wanted to follow up with you.
So it's kind of torn for a while on whether I can call you guys. Do you know Cindy?
Cindy, in relation to what?
So her husband is the guy that he's the one that stabbed that woman a couple years back, and he's in jail right now for it. They just tried him.
About Richie Wilder?
Yes, Richie Wilder. Over the last 3 to 4 months, she just keeps saying stuff that is very unnerving, like hinting that she had something to do with it.
She heavily insinuated through Facebook messages that she was involved in the murder that her husband committed.
Would you be able to send me all those messages?
Yeah, I can screenshot them and send them to you. Immediately after that, she says, it wasn't supposed to be a knife, and you were the only person I have said anything to. That one really raised the hair on the back of my neck.
Mr. Walters had a good conscience and said that this just wasn't sitting well with him, and he wanted to sign up as a confidential informant. We're very excited. We knew that this was our chance to hold her responsible for the role that she played. We basically wanted to get it in her words instead of in typed messages that she could have argued somebody else was typing. He went to Cindy's house. They sat outside in a parked car for a good couple of hours, and they talked, and a lot of it was just small talk. We knew that Mr. Walters was trying to get her just comfortable talking to him again.
I had a really good time. I mean, it's good. We're talking, connecting.
It's nice to get out of the house and laugh. I mean, I haven't laughed in a long time. I've just become this negative.
Cynical?
Yeah, that hateful, like, I don't know. I'm just mad all the time, and I don't know why.
About what?
I don't know. That's the problem.
Are you mad at your husband?
No, like, I'm proud of him. I'm just pissed that he got caught and that he got sloppy and impatient, and I thought we were like in the clear. And it all kind of started as like a joke. Like, I asked him, like, have you ever killed anybody? Just like, bitch needs to die. Like, because we like had this thing like planned for like 2 years, and we were just waiting on.
Seriously?
Yeah, seriously. Like, Jesus. I helped him. Like, I would leave, like, when he worked nights, I would leave the house at like midnight and like sit outside her house in my vehicle seeing who came into the house. Yeah, we had this planned out, and he it up.
I mean, how did, but like,
because he didn't clean the car good enough. One spot of blood in my car. He just has like so much anger towards her. That's why he couldn't just do one jab to the jugular and get out. No, he like went psycho on her.
I don't know. A knife's a stupid way to kill somebody.
Yeah.
So once you realized it was real, then what? Like,
And I just had to stick with, he was home with me all night.
to be honest, I thought you were full of when you told me before that he was home with you all night.
Yeah, I could go to jail for a very long time because I helped him.
I think Cynthia Wilder was proud of her involvement in this. I never felt that Cindy had any remorse at all for what happened to Angela. So when we heard her make those damning statements, we reached back and high-fived because we knew that we had her at that point.
There's been another arrest in connection with the 2015 Minot murder.
The wife of convicted murderer Richie Wilder was arrested today and charged with conspiracy in the murder of Wilder's ex-wife.
It was ultimate justice. It's kind of karma coming back and biting her. She was 100% involved in this murder, and she fortunately spilled it all to the wrong person.
The Minot woman who pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder will spend the rest of her life in jail.
Cynthia Wilder was sentenced today in a hearing where the judge went well beyond the recommendations of both the defense and prosecution.
You were the one person who could have intervened. You were the one person who could have spared Angela Wilder's life. You chose not to do so.
The life in prison sentence with no parole is the exact same sentence that her husband Richie Wilder is now serving for killing Angela Wilder.
It was an awesome feeling knowing that we were going to get further justice for Angela Wilder and put behind bars everybody who's responsible for her not being here today.
I think Angela should be remembered as the sweet, kind person that she was, always willing to help others, put others before herself. She just had so much compassion and so much caring.
It begins with a silence so ordinary no one thinks to name it. The kind of silence that lives between streetlights after midnight, when Florida heat still clings to the air and the world pretends it is asleep. In the summer of 1989, that silence broke without warning, without witnesses, without mercy, and what followed would harden into a cold case that outlived careers, marriages, and entire versions of the city itself. Tonight, we step back into that moment, not as historians, not as jurors, but as listeners pulled forward by the echo of a crime that refused to stay buried. The call came in just after 2 a.m., routed through a sleepy dispatcher who would later say she remembered the pause on the line more than the words. A pause heavy enough to feel like dread before it had a name. A body had been found near a drainage canal on the edge of a residential development still under construction. A place of half-poured foundations and skeletal street signs pointing to neighborhoods that did not yet exist. Police lights washed the palmettos in red and blue, insects scattering in confused spirals as officers approached the scene, already sensing that this was not an accident, not a misunderstanding, but something deliberate and final. The victim lay face down in the grass, one shoe missing, the other caked with mud. There were no identifying documents on the body, no wallet, no purse, no immediate explanation for how or why this person had ended up here. The medical examiner would later estimate time of death within a narrow window, but at that moment, time felt distorted, stretched thin by shock and unanswered questions. The first photographs were taken quickly, almost mechanically, capturing angles and details that would be studied for decades to come. By sunrise, the news had begun to spread. A homicide, investigators confirmed. No suspects, no witnesses. The area was sealed off. Neighbors questioned. Construction workers delayed and irritated, unaware that they were watching the birth of a mystery that would come to define the place they were building. Rumors filled the gaps left by official silence. Some whispered about drugs, others about infidelity, still others about a transient passing through at the wrong moment. None of it helped. None of it stuck. When the victim was identified later that day, the shock rippled outward. This was not someone on the margins, not a name that faded easily. Friends described laughter, routine, plans for the future spoken casually, never imagining how fragile those plans truly were. Family members arrived at the station in stunned disbelief, clinging to the hope that some mistake had been made, that paperwork had been switched, that reality would correct itself if given enough time. It did not. Detectives worked the case hard in those first weeks, fueled by urgency and the unspoken understanding that time is the enemy of truth. They canvassed the neighborhood, replayed the victim's last known movements, reconstructed hours that no one thought were significant until it was too late. They found fragments, half-answers, moments that almost made sense. Almost. A vehicle reported in the area, but the description was vague. A disagreement earlier that evening, but no clear motive. A few names circled in red, then crossed out. Evidence was collected with the best tools of the era. Fibers, fingerprints, blood samples sealed in envelopes and logged into evidence rooms that would one day overflow with similar promises of answers. DNA testing existed in 1989, but it was primitive, expensive, and rarely decisive. Samples were taken anyway, carefully stored, more an act of faith than strategy. Investigators could not have known then how critical those samples would become, how they would wait in darkness for science to catch up. Weeks turned into months. Leads dried up. Witnesses recanted or moved away. Tips slowed, then stopped. The case cooled, its file growing thicker as hope thinned. Detectives reassigned, promotions earned, retirements planned. The victim's family marked holidays with an empty space that no tradition could fill, their grief compounded by uncertainty. Not knowing became its own form of punishment, a question that never stopped asking itself. The city changed. New neighborhoods rose where the canal once marked the edge of development. Children played where evidence tape had once fluttered in the breeze. For newcomers, the story was a footnote, something mentioned briefly by longtime residents before conversation drifted to safer topics. For those who remembered, the case lingered like humidity, invisible but impossible to ignore. Inside the police department, the file was never officially closed, just shelved. A cold case, the label implied, but the truth was colder still. Resources were finite. New crimes demanded attention. The past waited quietly, patient in its refusal to disappear. Every so often, someone would pull the file down, flip through the pages, and feel the familiar frustration settle in their chest. Nothing new, nothing solid, nothing enough. Years passed. Technology advanced in ways no one in 1989 could have imagined. DNA databases expanded, algorithms refined, probabilities sharpened into near certainties. Across the country, old cases began to crack under the pressure of modern science. Names emerged from decades of anonymity. Arrests made headlines. Families found answers they had stopped expecting. In Florida, the 1989 file sat unchanged, its evidence sealed, its potential unrealized. Then, quietly, without ceremony, a routine review was scheduled. Not because of a tip, not because of public pressure, but because policy demanded it. Old evidence was being cataloged, assessed for viability under current standards. A technician opened a box that had not been touched in years, gloved hands lifting items wrapped and labeled by people who might no longer be alive. Among them, biological material collected at the scene, preserved against all odds. The decision to test it again was almost casual, another line item in a growing list of tasks. No one expected miracles. The case had resisted resolution for too long. Hope had learned to keep its distance. The sample was sent to the lab, entered into the system, and then forgotten amid the daily churn of work that defines law enforcement. Days passed, then weeks. When the call finally came, it did not announce itself as history. It was brief, technical, measured. A match had been found. Not partial. Not speculative. A full DNA profile, aligning with a name already in the system. Investigators sat in stunned silence, the kind that precedes disbelief. They asked the lab to confirm, then to confirm again. Each time, the answer was the same. The name carried weight, not because it was famous, but because it existed, because it transformed an abstract unknown into a person who could be located, questioned, held accountable. A suspect at last after decades of waiting. The cold case label began to crack, splintering under the force of possibility. For the detectives now assigned to the file, many of whom had been children when the crime occurred, the moment was surreal. They studied reports written before they joined the force, notes typed on machines that no longer existed. They traced timelines across generations, piecing together how a life intersected with a night long past. The suspect's history revealed nothing extraordinary, no obvious red flags that would have drawn attention in 1989. That, perhaps, was the most unsettling part. Word spread internally first, then outward. The victim's family was contacted, asked to come in, warned that new information had emerged. They arrived cautious, guarded by years of disappointment. When they heard the word DNA, their reactions collided. Relief, anger, disbelief, hope sharpened by fear of another letdown. Investigators spoke carefully, aware that certainty in science does not always translate to closure in life. As preparations began for the next steps, warrants drafted, strategies discussed, the weight of the years pressed in from all sides. This was not just about an arrest. It was about reconciling past failures with present capability, about asking what justice means when time has altered everyone involved. The city that once whispered about the crime would soon hear its name again, louder this time, impossible to ignore. And somewhere, unaware or pretending to be, the person whose DNA had waited decades to speak continued living, carrying a secret written in cells, now exposed by technology that did not exist when the silence first fell. The case was no longer cold. It was waking up, and with it came consequences that would ripple far beyond that quiet canal where everything began. This is where the story truly starts, not with the murder itself, but with the moment the past reached forward and grabbed the present by the throat, demanding to be heard. The moment the DNA match solidified, time began moving in two directions at once. Forward, with the urgency of warrants and protocols, and backward, dragging investigators through a past they had not lived but were now responsible for understanding. The Florida 1989 cold case was no longer an artifact. It was active, volatile, and unforgiving of mistakes. Every step from this point on carried the risk of unraveling decades of waiting with a single error. The name attached to the DNA profile was not dramatic. It did not arrive with a criminal legend or a trail of headlines. It was ordinary, unsettlingly so, belonging to someone who had passed through life without drawing much attention. The suspect had been arrested years earlier for an unrelated offense, a minor charge that required a DNA sample under laws that did not exist in 1989. That routine procedure, barely noticed at the time, was now the key that unlocked a silence nearly 35 years thick. Detectives gathered in a small conference room. The cold case file spread across the table like a map of unresolved grief. Pages yellowed at the edges, photographs grainy, their details softened by age. Notes written in shorthand no one used anymore. They read everything, line by line, aware that the smallest overlooked detail could now become critical. What had seemed irrelevant in 1989 might be decisive today. They reconstructed the suspect's life in parallel with the victim's final hours, aligning calendars, addresses, employment records. Where was he living at the time? How close was he to the canal? Did their paths ever cross in documented ways, or only in the shadows between known events? The answers emerged slowly, reluctantly, but they emerged. Proximity, opportunity, a connection thin enough to be missed back then, thick enough to matter now. Before any move could be made, the evidence itself had to withstand scrutiny. Defense attorneys would attack the chain of custody, question the integrity of samples stored for decades, suggest contamination, coincidence, conspiracy. Investigators anticipated this, pulling logs, signatures, storage records. They tracked every hand that had touched the evidence, every transfer between rooms, every inventory audit. It was painstaking work, invisible to the public, essential to survival in court. Meanwhile, the victim's family existed in a suspended state, caught between hope and dread. They were told not to speak publicly yet, advised to let the process unfold. Friends and relatives sensed something had changed, that the long-standing silence had cracked, but details remained scarce. Nights were restless. Old memories resurfaced uninvited. Grief, long dormant, stirred with unexpected force. As detectives prepared to approach the suspect, they debated strategy. A direct arrest carried risks. If the DNA evidence was challenged successfully, an early misstep could compromise everything. Surveillance was authorized instead. Quiet, discreet. The goal was to observe, to learn, to see whether time had left any cracks in the suspect's carefully maintained normalcy. What they saw was disconcertingly mundane. A job, a routine. Family members who described him as dependable, predictable, unremarkable. No obvious signs of guilt. No visible paranoia. The kind of person neighbors waved to without thinking. It raised a question investigators knew too well. How does someone carry a secret like that for decades without it leaking into daily life? They searched for patterns, revisited old witness statements, comparing them against the suspect's known behaviors. Comment here. An unexplained absence there. Each detail was weighed, contextualized, debated. Nothing screamed confession. Everything whispered possibility. In cold case work, whispers are often all you get. The decision to bring the suspect in for questioning came after weeks of preparation. The interview room was chosen deliberately, neutral, unthreatening. Detectives rehearsed their approach, knowing that time had altered interrogation dynamics. This was not a young man facing immediate consequences, but someone who had lived a full adult life since the crime, someone who might genuinely believe he had escaped accountability. When the suspect arrived, he appeared calm, cooperative. He answered preliminary questions easily, discussing his background, his work, his memories of the late 1980s. His recollections were vague, as expected, filtered through decades of living. When asked about the area near the canal, he shrugged, said he had driven through often, that it was developing rapidly back then. Nothing unusual, nothing incriminating. The shift came subtly, a question framed slightly differently. A pause held just long enough to be uncomfortable. The mention of forensic testing, not accusatory, just informative. His posture changed. Not dramatically, but enough. A tightening around the eyes. A breath held too long. Investigators noted everything, trained to read the body's language when words refused to cooperate. They did not reveal the DNA match immediately. Instead, they let the suspect talk, filling silence with fragments of memory, some true, some perhaps rehearsed. They asked about relationships, conflicts, routines. They circled back to the night of the murder without naming it explicitly. The goal was not confession, not yet, but calibration. How would he respond when the past pressed closer? After hours, the interview ended without resolution. The suspect left, shaken but not broken. Detectives reviewed footage late into the night, analyzing every micro-expression, every shift in tone. Opinions differed. Some believed he knew the walls were closing in. Others cautioned against confirmation bias. The DNA was strong, but the case needed more than science. It needed narrative coherence, a story that made sense to a jury decades removed from the crime. Prosecutors were brought in early, briefed on findings, asked to weigh risks. They emphasized patience. The strength of cold case prosecutions lies in preparation, not speed. Warrants would come, but only when the foundation was unassailable. The suspect's home, vehicle, digital footprint, all potential sources of corroboration or contradiction. As legal wheels turned, media interest began to stir. A leaked comment, a subtle change in police language. Reporters sensed movement. Headlines speculated cautiously about a break in a long-dormant case. The department issued no confirmations. Silence this time was strategic. Inside the evidence room, technicians revisited items collected in 1989 with new eyes. Advanced testing methods revealed details previously invisible. Touch DNA, trace materials, patterns that technology had only recently learned to recognize. Each discovery tightened the web, transforming circumstantial threads into a fabric strong enough to hold weight. For the investigators, Sleep became optional. The responsibility felt immense. This was not just about solving a crime. It was about restoring faith in a system that had once failed, about proving that time does not erase accountability. Every decision carried the voices of those who had waited, unheard, for answers. The suspect, now aware that something was wrong, began making calls, consulting an attorney, asking careful questions. The shift from ignorance to defense was subtle but unmistakable. Investigators noted it with grim satisfaction. Pressure applied slowly was working. As Part 2 closes, the case stands at a threshold. DNA has spoken, but the law demands more than truth. It demands proof arranged into a story that can survive attack. The silence that once protected the crime is thinning, stretched by scrutiny and science. What remains is fragile, and the next moves will determine whether the past finally collapses into confession and consequence, or retreats once more into the shadows it has occupied for so long. Pressure does not arrive loudly. It seeps in, fills the quiet spaces, turns routine into strain. After the interview, after the suspect walked out of the station pretending his life had not just tilted, investigators felt the temperature of the case rise. Phones rang more often. Emails carried heavier language. The Florida 1989 cold case was no longer a file in storage. It was a living organism, demanding attention, resources, precision. Surveillance intensifide. Not the cinematic kind, no cars parked outside for hours with engines running, but discreet checks, digital footprints traced, financial patterns reviewed. Investigators wanted to know how the suspect reacted when he thought no one was watching. Did he search his own name? Did he revisit old places? Did he talk too much or not at all? In modern investigations, silence can be as revealing as panic. They discovered he had contacted an attorney within 48 hours of the interview. Not unusual, not incriminating, but significant. The timing mattered. It suggested awareness, an internal alarm triggered by questions that reached further back than he expected. Detectives logged it carefully, another data point in a growing matrix of behavior. Meanwhile, prosecutors demanded reinforcement. DNA alone, even conclusive DNA, is not always enough after decades. Jurors want context. They want motive, opportunity, narrative clarity. They want to believe the past can be understood, not just measured. So investigators returned to 1989 again, this time hunting for what had been dismissed as background noise. They re-interviewed witnesses who were now older, slower to recall, but sometimes freer to speak. People who had been afraid in the past, unsure of what they saw or heard, now carried less fear and more regret. One neighbor remembered an argument near the canal, voices raised, then silence. Another recalled a vehicle idling too long, headlights off. Details once considered unreliable now aligned disturbingly well with the suspect's known movements. Each interview was treated like a fragile artifact. Memories degrade. Suggestion can distort. Detectives avoided leading questions, letting witnesses speak in their own rhythms. Some cried. Some apologized for not coming forward sooner. Investigators reassured them gently, knowing that guilt, like grief, lingers long after usefulness fades. The suspect's history in the late 1980s was reconstructed with forensic patience. Employment records placed him within miles of the crime scene. A former coworker recalled him leaving early on the day after the murder, citing illness. At the time, it meant nothing. Now it meant everything. Patterns formed slowly, like an image developing in a darkroom, shapes emerging from blur. Search warrants were drafted, revised, debated. Judges demanded specificity. What exactly were investigators looking for after 35 years? The answer was complicated. They sought corroboration. Old clothing, souvenirs, documents, anything that connected the suspect emotionally or materially to the victim. Cold case searches often uncover nothing, but sometimes they uncover too much. When the warrant was finally approved, execution was swift and quiet. The suspect's home was searched while he was away, minimizing confrontation. Officers moved carefully, aware that every action would be scrutinized later. They documented everything, from the contents of drawers to the arrangement of personal items. The house told a story of normalcy, of a life lived without obvious disruption. Then, in a box stored deep in a closet, they found items that made the room feel smaller. Old photographs, newspaper clippings from the early 1990s, articles about the murder, the case, the victim. Some people collect news out of curiosity, some out of obsession. Investigators did not jump to conclusions, but they noted the dates, the way the clippings were folded, preserved, kept. Digital devices were seized as well. Computers, phones, external drives. Analysts combed through years of data, searching for traces of fixation, guilt, or preparation. Deleted files were recovered. Search histories examined. There were no explicit confessions, no dramatic revelations, but there were patterns. Repeated searches about cold cases, about DNA technology, about statute limitations. Anxiety leaves fingerprints too. As evidence accumulated, the emotional weight intensified. Detectives felt the presence of the victim in every room, every late-night meeting. They spoke her name more often now, not as a file label but as a person whose life had been interrupted. Photographs of her smiled from the past, frozen in a time before violence erased possibility. The victim's family was finally brought into the circle. Carefully, delicately, they were told that a suspect had been identified, that evidence was strong, that nothing was guaranteed. The room went quiet. Tears flowed without warning. Hope is a dangerous thing after decades of disappointment, but it is impossible to suppress completely. Investigators promised transparency, updates, honesty. They could not promise closure. Media pressure increased. Reporters filed public records requests. Speculation filled local broadcasts. The phrase "cold case solved" appeared in headlines, premature and misleading. Law enforcement corrected the narrative carefully, emphasizing investigation over conclusion. Words mattered now more than ever. The suspect, through his attorney, declined further interviews. The shift was complete. Cooperation had given way to defense. Prosecutors interpreted this not as guilt, but as inevitability. The adversarial process had begun, whether anyone liked it or not. Behind closed doors, investigators and prosecutors rehearsed the case like a performance with no audience yet. They mapped timelines on whiteboards, connected evidence with string and logic. They anticipated counterarguments, alternate suspects, claims of contamination. They prepared expert witnesses to explain DNA in language a jury could understand without oversimplifying its power. One question haunted them. Why now? Why had the suspect's DNA only surfaced years later? The answer lay in legislation, in policy changes that required DNA collection for crimes that once did not qualify. Chance, timing, the randomness of justice delayed. It was both comforting and unsettling, a reminder that resolution often depends on forces beyond intention. As days turned into weeks, tension coiled tighter. The suspect remained free, his life outwardly unchanged, but investigators knew the walls were narrowing. An arrest was coming. The only question was when and how. Too early and the case could fracture. Too late and momentum could be lost. Then came the lab report that shifted everything. Additional testing on secondary evidence produced a partial profile consistent with the suspect. Not definitive alone, but powerful in combination. Science had found another voice, another confirmation whispering the same name. Prosecutors greenlit the next step. An arrest warrant was drafted, reviewed, approved. The language was precise, measured, devastating. Years of work distilled into paragraphs that would change lives permanently. Investigators felt a mixture of relief and dread. This was the moment they had worked toward, but also the moment when control begins to slip into the hands of courts and juries. The arrest was executed early in the morning. No spectacle, no cameras, just officers at a door, a knock, a moment of confusion on the suspect's face before realization settled in. He did not resist. He asked few questions. The silence was heavier than any outburst could have been. As he was led away, neighbors watched from behind curtains, unaware of the history unfolding in front of them. A man they thought they knew was being taken into custody for a crime older than some of their own children. Shock rippled quietly through the community, disbelief mingling with curiosity and fear. At the station, booking photos were taken. Fingerprints rolled. The suspect's name entered a system that would now forever link it to the victims. Investigators watched from a distance, feeling the strange emptiness that follows achievement in cases like this. Solving does not erase. It only clarifies. As Part 3 fades, the Florida 1989 cold case stands on the brink of public reckoning. Evidence has converged. Silence has broken. Yet the path ahead remains uncertain, paved with legal challenges and emotional landmines. The past has finally caught up, but it has not finished speaking, and what it demands next will test everyone involved in ways no amount of preparation can fully contain. The arrest did not bring silence. It brought noise of a different kind. A low, relentless hum that filled courtrooms, hallways, living rooms across the county. The Florida 1989 cold case was no longer whispered about. It was spoken aloud, debated, dissected, carried on morning radio and late-night news. Names that had slept for decades were suddenly awake again, and with them came memories people thought they had buried for good. In the hours after the arrest, investigators moved into a phase that felt unfamiliar after so many years of quiet pursuit. Now everything was visible. Every decision would be questioned. Every step retraced. The case file, once handled by only a few, became an open battlefield where defense and prosecution circled each other cautiously, each searching for weakness. The suspect was arraigned under harsh fluorescent lights, his face expressionless as charges were read. Murder, a word that fell heavy in the room, unchanged by time. He entered a plea of not guilty, his voice steady, almost rehearsed. There was no outburst, no declaration of innocence beyond the formal. Cameras clicked. Reporters scribbled. The moment was recorded and archived instantly, a stark contrast to the years when nothing about this case seemed to exist at all. Prosecutors began shaping the narrative they would eventually present to a jury. They knew the challenge ahead. Time had not been kind to evidence. Witnesses were elderly or deceased. Physical proof was limited, fragile, vulnerable to attack. But DNA, cold and mathematical, stood at the center like an unblinking eye. It did not care about memory or fading recollection. It only cared about match and probability. Still, science alone rarely convinces without context. Prosecutors returned again to the victim's life, determined to tell her story not as a statistic but as a human being. They reviewed photographs, letters, school records. They spoke with surviving relatives who described her laugh, her stubbornness, the way she planned her future with optimism that now felt cruel in retrospect. The goal was not sentimentality, but grounding. Jurors needed to feel the loss before they could understand the crime. Defense attorneys took a different approach. They focused on absence. Absence of eyewitnesses. Absence of confession. Absence of direct proof placing their client at the scene on the night of the murder. They questioned the integrity of decades-old evidence, the possibility of contamination, the motives of investigators reopening a case under pressure to produce results. Doubt became their weapon, sharpened carefully. Motions flooded the court. Suppress the DNA. Exclude certain statements. Challenge the search warrant. Each argument forced prosecutors to defend not just conclusions, but process. How evidence was collected. How it was stored. How it was retested. The past became a legal minefield, every step scrutinized under modern standards. Meanwhile, the community reacted in waves. Some felt vindicated, relieved that the monster they imagined now had a face. Others felt betrayed, struggling to reconcile the suspect's public persona with the allegations. He had attended barbecues, waved at neighbors, lived quietly. Evil, it seemed, had not announced itself. It had blended in. The victim's family lived in a state of suspended emotion. Hope collided with fear daily. They attended hearings, listened to arguments that dissected their loved one's death with clinical detachment. At times it felt like she was disappearing again, reduced to evidence and exhibits. Prosecutors checked in often, offering reassurance, updates, honesty. There were no guarantees, only effort. As pretrial hearings dragged on, new information surfaced. A former acquaintance of the suspect contacted police, prompted by media coverage. He claimed the suspect had made disturbing comments years earlier, jokes about getting away with murder, statements dismissed at the time as dark humor. Investigators evaluated the claim carefully, aware of the dangers of retrospective interpretation. The witness's memory was cross-checked, timelines verified. It was not a smoking gun, but it added texture to the portrait forming around the suspect. Expert witnesses prepared to take the stand, rehearsing explanations of DNA probability, chain of custody, statistical certainty. They knew defense attorneys would try to confuse, to overwhelm jurors with technical language. Simplicity became strategy. Explain the science clearly. Let the numbers speak without arrogance. The judge set a trial date. The announcement landed like a final drumbeat. After 35 years, the case would finally be heard in full. Investigators felt a mixture of pride and unease. This was the point where their work would either stand or collapse under scrutiny. There would be no quiet adjustments now, no private reevaluations. Everything would happen under oath. As the trial approached, media interest intensified. Documentarians requested access. Podcasts speculated freely. The phrase "cold case solved" was repeated endlessly, even as prosecutors cautioned that the legal process had only just begun. The public wanted certainty. The law offered none. Jury selection revealed the depth of the case's reach. Potential jurors admitted to having heard about it, discussed it, formed opinions. Finding impartiality became a challenge. Attorneys questioned candidates meticulously, searching for bias, hidden assumptions, emotional connections. Each selected juror carried the weight of responsibility visibly, aware that their verdict would echo far beyond the courtroom. Opening statements set the tone. Prosecutors spoke of a young woman whose life ended violently, of evidence finally given a voice by science, of patience rewarded by truth. Defense attorneys spoke of reasonable doubt, of a man accused based on fragments and probability, of the danger of rewriting history to fit modern expectations. The jury listened, faces unreadable. Witnesses took the stand one by one. Investigators described the original crime scene, the limitations of 1989 technology, the decisions made under pressure. Some admitted mistakes openly, acknowledging what could not be changed. Transparency became a shield against accusation. The victims' relatives testified softly, their words heavy with years of waiting. When the DNA expert testified, the room seemed to lean forward collectively. Charts were displayed, numbers explained. The probability of the match was described in terms so vast they bordered on incomprehensible. Defense attorneys cross-examined aggressively, suggesting contamination, lab error, coincidence. The expert remained calm, precise, unwavering. The suspect sat quietly throughout, his expression controlled. Occasionally he whispered to his attorney, scribbled notes, stared straight ahead. He did not look at the victim's family. Observers searched his face for clues, for guilt or innocence, but found only restraint. As the prosecution rested, tension thickened. Defense witnesses challenged timelines, questioned memory, emphasized the absence of direct observation. They painted a picture of a case built on inference and assumption, urging jurors to resist emotional pull. The trial became a duel of narratives, each plausible in its own way. Closing arguments approached like an approaching storm. Prosecutors reminded jurors of the totality of evidence, of science combined with circumstance, of a pattern that pointed consistently to one man. Defense attorneys returned to doubt, to the dangers of certainty built on old ground. They asked jurors to imagine the consequences of being wrong. The jury was instructed. The courtroom emptied slowly as jurors filed out to deliberate. Hours passed, then days. Each minute felt stretched, heavy. The victim's family waited in quiet rooms. Investigators paced hallways. The suspect remained in custody, time suspended. When the jury finally returned, the air felt thin. Everyone stood. The foreperson held the verdict form with trembling hands. Whatever the outcome, history was about to shift. For the Florida 1989 cold case, the question was no longer whether the past could be reached, but whether it could finally be resolved in a way that satisfied truth, law, and the aching silence left behind by decades of unanswered questions. The verdict did not arrive like thunder. It arrived quietly, almost timidly, carried into the courtroom by 12 people who had not slept well in days. The room stood as one, breath held, every movement amplified by the silence. When the foreperson spoke, the words felt both inevitable and unreal, drifting through the air with a weight that pressed down on every chest. Guilty. The sound of it rippled outward, touching faces, shoulders, memories. The Florida 1989 cold case was no longer an open wound. It had been stitched shut, though the scar would never fade. There was no explosion of emotion. No shouting. No collapse. The victim's family wept quietly, hands clasped, eyes closed, as if afraid that looking directly at the moment might make it disappear. Prosecutors nodded, restrained, already aware that justice is never as clean as headlines suggest. Defense attorneys stared straight ahead, absorbing the outcome, calculating the next steps even as the present refused to pause for them. The suspect showed little reaction, a tightening of the jaw, a slow exhale, then stillness again. Sentencing loomed like a second trial, one focused less on facts and more on consequence. The court ordered a pre-sentencing investigation, reopening the suspect's entire life to examination. His childhood, his work history, his relationships, everything became relevant now. The same system that had ignored him for decades now dissected him with surgical intensity. Outside the courthouse, microphones were raised. The phrase "cold case solved" echoed again, louder than ever. Reporters framed the verdict as closure, as triumph, as proof that time cannot hide truth forever. But inside the community, reactions were far more complicated. Some felt relief, others felt unsettled. If someone could live undetected for so long, who else might be hiding in plain sight? The victim's story returned to the forefront, no longer as a mystery but as a life cut short. Friends spoke publicly for the first time, recounting shared memories, unfinished plans, moments frozen in time. Her name trended online, attached to words like justice and accountability. Yet those who loved her knew that nothing had truly been restored. The years between her death and the verdict remained empty, unreachable. Investigators faced their own reckoning. For some, the verdict validated decades of quiet persistence, the belief that evidence mattered even when no one was watching. For others, it reopened old regrets. Could this have been solved sooner? Were there moments when the trail had been close enough to touch, only to slip away? Success did not erase those questions. To sharpen them, the defense filed an appeal almost immediately, as expected. Allegations of procedural error, challenges to the admissibility of DNA evidence, claims of unfair prejudice due to media coverage. The legal battle was not over. It had simply changed form. The verdict, powerful as it was, existed within a system designed to question itself endlessly. Sentencing day arrived under heavy security. The courtroom filled again, this time with an air of finality. The judge reviewed impact statements, listened to arguments, weighed factors that could never be fully measured. The victim's family spoke last. Their words were steady, controlled, carrying decades of pain without theatrics. They did not ask for vengeance. They asked for acknowledgement, for recognition that a life had mattered. The judge pronounced the sentence slowly, deliberately. Life imprisonment. No parole. The words settled heavily, irreversible. The suspect was led away, the sound of chains echoing briefly before fading. For the first time since 1989, the case had nowhere left to go. Yet even after sentencing, the story refused to end cleanly. The conviction sparked renewed interest in other cold cases across the state. Police departments reviewed old evidence with fresh urgency. Laboratories received boxes untouched for years. Families who had long abandoned hope felt it stir again, cautiously, painfully. The Florida case became a reference point, cited in meetings and press releases as proof that patience and technology could still converge. Documentaries were announced. books proposed. The case transformed into content, consumed by audiences far removed from its human core. Investigators navigated requests carefully, mindful of the line between transparency and exploitation. The victim's family declined most interviews, choosing privacy over participation in a narrative that no longer felt like theirs. Behind the scenes, appeals moved slowly through the courts. Judges reviewed transcripts. Experts submitted affidavits. The defense argued that statistical probability had been misunderstood, that jurors had been overwhelmed by numbers rather than convinced by facts. Prosecutors responded with precision, defending every step, every procedure. The case continued to live, though stripped of its mystery. Years passed. The appeals were denied one by one. Each decision reaffirmed the verdict, reinforcing the idea that the system, though imperfect, had held. The suspect aged in prison, his name fading from headlines, replaced by newer cases, fresher tragedies. Time resumed its forward march, indifferent to resolution. For the victim's family, life moved cautiously onward. Birthdays were still difficult, anniversaries still heavy, but the constant question, who did this and why, no longer dominated every thought. In its place was a quieter grief, less frantic, more settled. The cold case had defined their lives for decades. Now it existed as part of their history rather than its center. Investigators retired. New detectives took their places, trained in techniques unimaginable in 1989. DNA databases expanded. Software improved. The lessons of the Florida case were taught in academies, framed as both success and warning. Evidence matters. Documentation matters. And silence does not mean absence of truth. Sometimes, late at night, those closest to the case still revisited its details. The traffic stop that had changed everything. The routine review that had cracked the silence. The fragile chain of decisions that, if broken at any point, would have left the case buried forever. They understood now how easily justice could be delayed indefinitely, how dependent it was on chance as much as determination. The phrase cold case solved remained powerful, but its meaning evolved. It no longer implied neat endings or emotional satisfaction. It meant accountability, however late. It meant acknowledgement. It meant that the dead were not forgotten entirely, even when the world moved on. The Florida 1989 cold case became a closed file, stored carefully, labeled clearly, its pages worn from handling. But its echo lingered in every reopened investigation, every cautious knock on a door, every lab technician re-examining old samples under new machines. It reminded everyone involved that the past is never truly past, that silence can be broken, and that even decades later, truth can still surface, slow and unrelenting, demanding to be seen. Long after the courtroom emptied and the microphones were packed away, the case kept breathing. It breathed in quiet rooms where files were reopened out of habit, not instruction. It breathed in the slow routines of a prison where a man now woke each morning knowing there would be no release date to circle on a calendar. It breathed in a neighborhood that had learned how easily normal life could fracture and how slowly it could be stitched back together. The Florida 1989 cold case was officially solved, but resolution did not bring silence. It brought a different kind of noise, lower, more persistent. In the weeks following sentencing, investigators were asked a question they had not anticipated. What else did this man do? The logic was brutal and unavoidable. If he could hide one violent act for decades, could there be others buried deeper, forgotten even by those paid to remember? The inquiry was not accusatory at first. It was procedural. Databases were searched. Old reports were compared. Patterns were hunted for in places where patterns rarely revealed themselves willingly. Nothing conclusive emerged. No sudden cascade of confessions. No matching DNA hits from other scenes. Just fragments, near misses, similarities that hovered close enough to provoke unease but never close enough to act upon. Still, the possibility lingered, refusing to be dismissed. The solved case had opened a door to a hallway no one wanted to walk down alone. The victim's name, once absent from public conversation, became etched into official memory. A scholarship was established at a local school. A memorial plaque was installed near the site where her life had ended, small and unobtrusive, visible only to those who knew to look for it. People stopped there occasionally, some leaving flowers, others just standing in silence, absorbing the weight of a moment that had outlived its time. For the detectives who had carried the case through its final years, the emotional aftermath was more complex than any headline suggested. They were congratulated, praised for perseverance, cited in conferences and journals. Yet many felt an unexpected hollowness. The pursuit had ended, and with it the purpose that had shaped their days. Closure, they discovered, was not a celebration but an absence. One investigator admitted privately that he missed the case. Not the violence, not the pain, but the clarity, the certainty that his work mattered in a way few things ever did. Solving a cold case had given his career a narrative arc, a beginning and an end. Now he faced a future full of open files, none guaranteed to yield answers, all demanding the same faith. The public fascination intensified before it faded. Streaming platforms released documentaries with ominous titles and dramatic reenactments. Podcasts dissected every decision, every misstep, every moment when the truth had almost surfaced. Armchair detectives debated alternate theories, questioning whether the right person had truly been convicted. Doubt became entertainment, a way to keep the story alive after justice had already spoken. The prosecution watched this unfold with restrained frustration. They had proven their case beyond reasonable doubt, followed protocols meticulously, withstood appeals. Yet they understood the hunger for mystery. A solved case removes the audience's role. It closes the door on speculation. For some, that closure felt unsatisfying, even threatening. The defense seized on this climate, filing additional motions, framing public doubt as evidence of unresolved questions. The courts rejected them methodically, reaffirming the verdict. Each denial reinforced the finality of the outcome, yet also extended the life of the story, keeping it present, relevant, alive. Years slipped by almost unnoticed. The scholarship funded its first recipient. The memorial weathered its first storm. The prison intake photo aged into a face marked by time rather than shock. The case settled into a quieter existence, referenced occasionally, remembered selectively. Then something unexpected happened. A retired lab technician came forward with a story that did not change the outcome but complicated its texture. She spoke of early DNA testing limitations, of samples once deemed unusable that modern techniques could now analyze. Her testimony did not undermine the conviction. It reinforced how narrow the margin had been between ignorance and knowledge. How many other cases still rested on that fragile edge? Her words reignited conversations in police departments across the country. Funding requests were drafted. Old evidence lockers were opened again. The Florida case became a catalyst not because of its drama, but because of its delay. It demonstrated what time could erase and what it could preserve, depending entirely on human effort. For the victim's family, these renewed discussions were a double-edged sword. They supported advancements, understood their importance, yet each mention of the case pulled them back into a space they had fought to leave. Healing, they learned, was not linear. It looped, retraced its steps, demanded patience they were still learning to give. They declined invitations to speak at conferences, choosing instead to write letters, private messages to investigators working similar cases. Their words were simple. Do not give up. Do not assume silence means absence. Remember that behind every file is a life paused in mid-sentence. Inside the prison, the convicted man adjusted to routine. Appeals exhausted, options narrowed. He existed in a world measured by counts and schedules. He maintained his innocence in occasional letters, written carefully, without anger. Whether those words were self-deception or truth no longer mattered to the system. The verdict had settled that question officially, permanently. Yet even here, the case refused to rest entirely. Other inmates asked questions. Guards recognized the name. The cold case carried a weight that followed him, an identity he could not shed. In solving the mystery, society had created a new one. Who was he now, stripped of secrecy, defined by a single act? The answer, like most things in this story, remained incomplete. On the anniversary of the crime, a small gathering formed near the memorial. No cameras, no speeches, just people who remembered and people who wanted to understand. Candles flickered, names were spoken softly. The past felt close enough to touch, yet distant enough to breathe around. Someone asked quietly whether justice had been served. No one answered immediately. Eventually, an older woman spoke. Justice came late, she said, but it came. That does not make it whole. It makes it real. Her words lingered in the air, heavier than applause, more enduring than outrage. They captured the truth that the Florida 1989 cold case had taught everyone who followed it closely. Solving a mystery does not restore what was lost. It does not rewind time or soften grief. It simply acknowledges reality, however uncomfortable, however delayed. As night fell, the candles burned low. People drifted away one by one, carrying with them fragments of a story that had shaped their community for decades. The case no longer demanded attention. It no longer screamed for answers. It existed now as a reminder, quiet but insistent, that truth can wait, but it never disappears. And somewhere, in offices and labs and homes across the country, other cold cases sat untouched, their own silences intact, their own truths patient. The Florida case had shown what was possible. It had also shown how much was still unfinished, how many stories remained suspended between then and now, waiting for someone to listen closely enough to hear them speak. Time did what it always does after a case is declared closed. It stretched, thinned the sharp edges. It allowed the public to move on while leaving behind a residue that never fully washed away. The Florida 1989 cold case slipped out of headlines, but it did not disappear. It lingered in footnotes, in training manuals, in the quiet instincts of detectives who had learned never to trust the comfort of resolution. In precincts far from Florida, officers referenced it without naming it. They spoke of the case where evidence waited decades to speak. The one where technology outran doubt. The one that proved forgetting was not the same as forgiveness. Rookie investigators listened, absorbing the lesson with the seriousness usually reserved for cautionary tales. This was not a story about brilliance. It was about patience, about stubbornness, about refusing to let time become an accomplice. Back in the original community, life resumed its rhythms. Shops opened and closed. Children grew up unaware that their sidewalks had once been crime scenes. New families moved into homes where the past was disclosed only in paperwork, reduced to a paragraph, then to a footnote, then to nothing at all. Yet some residents felt it anyway, an unease they could not name, as if the ground itself remembered. The victim's family learned how to exist in this altered landscape. They no longer fielded calls from reporters, no longer braced themselves for anniversaries marked by public scrutiny. Instead, they navigated a quieter challenge, redefining themselves outside the gravity of loss. For years, their identity had been shaped by absence, by waiting, by unanswered questions. Now the questions had answers, but the absence remained. One family member described it as standing in a room after the music stops. The noise is gone, but your ears are still ringing. You expect something to happen, another note, another interruption. When nothing comes, the silence feels wrong, almost aggressive. This was that silence. Earned, necessary, and deeply unsettling. The investigators, too, felt the shift. Without the case anchoring their days, some struggled to adjust. Others dove into new work with an intensity that bordered on obsession, chasing leads with the urgency of people who knew how easily years could be wasted. A few transferred to cold case units permanently, unable to let go of the hunt, unwilling to accept that some files might never be reopened. Training seminars began to include segments on evidence preservation inspired by the case. Gloves changed, storage protocols tightened, documentation grew more meticulous. Every small improvement carried an unspoken acknowledgement of past failure. The Florida case had not only solved a murder, it had indicted a system that once believed time erased relevance. In academic circles, criminologists debated its implications. Was the conviction a triumph of science or a condemnation of delay? Did justice delayed still qualify as justice? Or was it merely a symbolic gesture toward accountability? Papers were written, arguments sharpened, conclusions left deliberately open. The case resisted being reduced to a single lesson. Meanwhile, the convicted man's existence narrowed further. Prison has a way of compressing identity, sanding it down until only the essentials remain. He became known less for his name than for his case number, less for his words than for the silence that followed them. Interviews were requested and denied. Letters were written and unanswered. He aged quietly, watched by people who had no interest in his past beyond what it meant for security protocols. Occasionally, rumors surfaced. Claims of new witnesses, allegations of overlooked suspects. Each was examined, dismissed, filed away. The system, once cautious, now moved decisively. The burden of proof had shifted. Doubt was no longer enough to reopen doors. The case had crossed an invisible threshold from mystery to history. Yet history has a way of resurfacing when least expected. A journalist working on an unrelated investigation stumbled across an early interview transcript that had never been widely circulated. It contained a line barely noticeable, a remark made in passing by a neighbor in 1989. At the time, it had been logged and forgotten. Now, read through the lens of hindsight, it carried a different weight. Not exculpatory, not transformative, but suggestive. The journalist reached out to authorities, cautious, aware of the sensitivity. The response was polite but firm. The matter had been reviewed. The conviction stood. There was no appetite for reopening wounds over speculation. Still, the exchange stirred something. It reminded everyone how fragile certainty could be, how dependent it was on interpretation, context, and timing. The story gained a second life online.
Forum buzzed.
Timelines were reconstructed. Armchair analysts argued late into the night. The same patterns repeated themselves, familiar and exhausting. Some sought truth. Others sought contrarianism. A few sought notoriety. The victim's family stayed away, having learned the cost of engagement. In private moments, they reflected on how the case had shaped them. The years of waiting had taught them vigilance, resilience, and a distrust of easy answers. They supported advancements in forensic science, but they also understood its limits. Technology could reveal facts, but it could not restore innocence or undo harm. It could only illuminate what had already happened. One evening, a former detective from the case attended a small retirement gathering. Someone asked him what it felt like to finally solve it. He paused, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. Felt heavy, he said, like lifting something you had been carrying so long you forgot it was there, only to realize the weight had shaped your posture permanently. His words resonated because they spoke to a broader truth. The Florida cold case had altered everyone it touched. Changed careers. It reshaped families. It influenced policy. It became a reference point, a benchmark against which other cases were measured. Not because it was unique, but because it was typical. Because it represented countless stories that never reached resolution. As years passed, new technologies emerged, promising faster results, deeper insights. Each breakthrough was celebrated with cautious optimism. Investigators remembered the long wait, the decades of stagnation, and tempered their expectations. Progress, they knew, was rarely linear, came in bursts followed by plateaus, followed by setbacks. The memorial near the crime scene remained understated. Locals passed it without ceremony. Visitors sometimes stopped, reading the inscription, absorbing the finality of a name etched in metal. On certain days, flowers appeared. No one claimed responsibility. They were simply there, a quiet acknowledgement from someone who remembered, or perhaps someone who had just learned. The case entered textbooks, its details summarized, its emotional weight inevitably diluted. Students learned about DNA, about chain of custody, about the importance of preserving evidence. They did not learn about the waiting, about the years when nothing happened, about the families who lived in that nothing day after day. And yet, that waiting was the heart of the story. Because the Florida 1989 cold case was never just about how a crime was solved. It was about how long it took to care enough to solve it, how easily attention drifted, how many opportunities were missed because the world moved on while one life remained frozen in time. In the end, the case settled into a paradox. It was solved yet unfinished, answered yet still asking questions. It stood as proof that truth could survive neglect, but also as a warning about the cost of indifference. Somewhere, another file sat unopened. Another family waited. Another silence stretched on, patient and unforgiving. The Florida case had shown what persistence could achieve. It had also exposed how rare that persistence truly was. And so the story continued, not in headlines or courtrooms, but in the quiet determination of those who refused to believe that time alone could erase responsibility. The cold case had been cracked, but its echo remained, reverberating through every unanswered question still buried in the shadows, waiting for someone to listen closely enough to hear it breathe. The echo of the Florida 1989 cold case did not fade. It settled. It lodged itself in institutional memory, in the small decisions made during evidence intake, in the tone detectives used when they told families to be patient. It changed the air. You could feel it in interview rooms where clocks ticked too loudly, in storage facilities where boxes were no longer just boxes but potential witnesses waiting for the right moment to speak. Years after the conviction, a routine audit swept through multiple departments across the state, part of a broader initiative to reassess unsolved and newly solved cases alike. It was administrative on paper, mundane by design. But audits have a way of unsettling the dust, and dust remembers everything. In Florida, the audit team encountered the familiar markers of the 1989 case. Updated protocols born from old mistakes, annotations written in different inks by different hands across decades, a timeline that looked less like a straight line and more like a series of hesitations. The audit did not reopen the case. It didn't need to. Its purpose was not to question guilt but to understand process. How evidence moved, where it stalled, how assumptions calcified into conclusions. The team mapped the journey of a single sample from collection to conviction, tracing every transfer, every pause, every decision not to test because testing was once expensive, slow, uncertain. Each pause told a story of its own. Outside official channels, the case continued to live a parallel life. Podcasts dissected it with forensic precision and emotional speculation. Some hosts framed it as redemption, others as indictment. Listeners debated timelines, scrutinized transcripts, slowed down audio recordings to hear what might have been missed. The appetite for closure proved insatiable, even when closure had technically been delivered. The victim's name resurfaced more often now, spoken by people who had not been alive in 1989. To them, the case was not memory but discovery. It arrived fully formed with all the drama of hindsight. They did not feel the waiting. They did not know the nights when nothing changed, when phones stayed silent, when hope had to be rationed to survive. For those who lived through it, the renewed attention was complicated. Gratitude mingled with fatigue, awareness with intrusion. They had wanted the truth to be known, but they had not anticipated the afterlife of that truth. How it would be repackaged, monetized, debated by strangers who could turn off their screens and walk away. One family member described the sensation as being followed by your own shadow. No matter where you went, the case went with you. Even in moments of joy, it hovered at the edges, reminding you that your happiness existed alongside an irrevocable loss. The conviction had closed one door, but it had opened countless others. Law enforcement agencies across the country took note. Requests came in for briefings, for access to redacted files, for permission to cite the case in training materials. Florida became a reference point, not because it had been perfect, but because it had been flawed and persistent. Because it showed what could happen when a system acknowledged its own inertia and chose to move anyway. In one seminar, a veteran investigator spoke plainly to a room full of younger officers. "Cold cases don't go cold," he said. "We do." The line landed hard. It reframed the narrative, shifted responsibility back onto human choices. Technology could assist, but it could not replace will. Meanwhile, the prison system absorbed the convicted man into its rhythms. Appeals were filed and denied. Legal language stacked itself into towers of precedent and procedure. Each denial reinforced finality, yet finality never felt complete. There was always another question, another hypothetical, another voice insisting on alternative interpretations. Psychologists weighed in, analyzing post-conviction behavior, parsing interviews for signs of remorse or defiance. Some found neither. They found adaptation. A man learning how to exist within constraints, how to survive attention by becoming uninteresting. Silence became a strategy, a shield against the endless hunger for explanation. The community where the crime occurred began to change more visibly. New developments replaced old landmarks. Streets were widened. Businesses rebranded. The physical environment shed its past with the efficiency of progress. Only a few older residents remembered where things used to be, where police tape once fluttered in the heat, where neighbors had gathered in disbelief. At a town meeting unrelated to the case, someone mentioned it offhand, a reference point in a discussion about funding for forensic programs. The room fell quiet for a moment, not out of discomfort but recognition. The case had become shorthand for a collective experience, a reminder of vulnerability and resilience intertwined. Educational programs invited family members to speak, to humanize the data. Standing at podiums, they told stories not of violence but of life interrupted, of ordinary moments frozen in memory because they were the last. Their voices carried the authority of those who had waited the longest, who had paid the highest price for delay. As forensic science continued to evolve, new possibilities emerged. Techniques that could extract information from ever smaller samples, algorithms that could identify patterns invisible to the human eye. Each advancement sparked a familiar question. What else could be found, if only someone looked again? The Florida case loomed as both inspiration and warning. Not every cold case would end with a courtroom. Not every file contained a miracle waiting to be unlocked. Some held only silence, stubborn and complete. The danger lay in promising certainty where none existed. The Florida case had taught patience, but it had also taught humility. Late one night, a detective working an unrelated case pulled an old box from a shelf, its label faded but legible. He thought of Florida, of the decades it had taken. He thought of the families who might be waiting, unaware that their answers were inches away, separated only by time and attention. He logged the box, scheduled the tests, refused to let it slip back into obscurity. This was the quiet legacy of the 1989 case. Not spectacle but vigilance. Not celebration but resolve. The media eventually moved on, chasing fresher stories, faster conclusions. Headlines shortened. Interest waned. Yet the case remained embedded in policy, in practice, in the collective caution exercised when declaring something finished. It had altered the definition of over. In moments of reflection, those closest to the case acknowledged the strange duality of their outcome. They had truth, but they also had years that could never be returned. They had justice, but it arrived late, carrying the weight of everything it could not fix. They had answers, but those answers opened new questions about time, responsibility, and care. The Florida 1989 cold case stood as a testament to endurance, not just of evidence but of memory. It proved that facts could outlast neglect, that truth could survive storage rooms and skepticism. But it also underscored the human cost of waiting, the quiet erosion that occurred while systems hesitated. Somewhere, in another jurisdiction, a similar case sat untouched. A file number, a name, a moment frozen in paperwork. The Florida story whispered to it across years and miles, a reminder that silence was not the same as absence, that waiting was not the same as resolution. And so the cycle continued. Audits, reviews, breakthroughs, delays. Each part influenced by the last, each informed by stories like Florida's. The cold case had been solved, but its impact was ongoing, unfolding in ways that could not be neatly summarized or contained. As the years stretched forward, the lesson remained clear and unsettled. Justice was not a moment. It was a process, fragile and demanding, dependent on people willing to look again when everyone else had stopped looking. The Florida 1989 cold case had finally spoken, but it did not say goodbye. It lingered, a low hum beneath the surface, reminding anyone who listened closely that time does not absolve, that evidence remembers, and that the truth, once heard, continues to ask what will be done next. Time did what it always does after the noise fades. It rearranged priorities. It softened urgency. It allowed the Florida 1989 cold case to slip from the front of collective attention into a deeper, quieter place where only those directly shaped by it still felt its daily weight. But quiet did not mean inactive. Beneath the surface, the case continued to move people, to influence choices that would never be traced back to a single headline. In a forensic lab several counties away, a young analyst reviewed a backlog report and paused at a familiar reference. The Florida case had become a benchmark, cited whenever someone questioned whether old evidence was worth the cost of re-examination. The analyst had heard the story during training, had studied the timeline, had memorized the mistakes and the moments of near-miss. Now, staring at a list of untested samples from unrelated cases, the lesson felt personal. She flagged them for priority review, knowing the decision would likely go unnoticed, undocumented, but hoping it might matter someday. This was how the legacy spread, not through speeches or documentaries, but through instincts quietly recalibrated, through professionals choosing caution over convenience, persistence over assumption. The solved cold case had not closed a chapter. It had rewritten the margins of many others. For the victim's family, the years following the conviction settled into a new rhythm. Birthdays came and went. Holidays were navigated with practiced care. The absence remained constant, but its edges shifted. Grief became less sharp, more structural, something built into daily life rather than erupting unpredictably. Yet certain triggers still cut through the calm. A familiar frase. A date on the calendar. A passing reference to DNA in a news story. They avoided most media now. The story had been told enough. Each retelling felt like an echo, fainter but still capable of shaking the ground beneath their feet. When asked how they felt about the case's influence on policy and practice, they answered carefully. If something good could grow from what they lost, they welcomed it. But they resisted framing tragedy as purpose. Loss did not need justification. Meanwhile, the man convicted of the crime aged in a system that had little interest in nuance. Years compressed into routines. Seasons marked by temperature changes felt through barred windows. He rarely spoke about the case anymore. When he did, his words were spare, almost clinical. There was no dramatic protest, no cinematic confession. Just a steady insistence on his version of events, repeated so often it risked becoming background noise. Corrections officers noticed the change. The notoriety that once followed him faded as newer cases captured attention. He became just another inmate, defined less by what he had done and more by how he behaved now. The cold case that had once dominated his identity receded, though it never disappeared entirely. It lingered in file notes, in whispered conversations, in the knowledge that his name would always be searchable, always tied to a moment he could not outrun. Outside prison walls, the legal community continued to debate the implications of the case. Law review articles cited it when discussing evidentiary preservation. Panels referenced it when arguing for expanded funding. Critics questioned whether reliance on late-stage DNA risked overshadowing systemic failures earlier in investigations. Supporters countered that science had become the system's conscience, correcting human error when nothing else could. The debate was rarely about Florida itself. It was about what Florida represented. A case where truth waited patiently while institutions caught up. A reminder that justice was not self-executing, that it required maintenance, attention, humility. In the town where it all began, life moved forward in visible ways. New families moved in, unaware of the history embedded in certain addresses. Children played in places once marked by caution tape. The past receded into anecdotes shared by longtime residents, stories that sounded almost unreal to younger ears. The cold case became local lore, its edges softened by distance. Yet even here, traces remained. A retired officer ran into a former neighbor at a grocery store. They exchanged pleasantries, then fell into silence, both thinking of the same thing without naming it. Shared memory had a gravity that conversation could not always sustain. Occasionally, someone new would discover the story and feel compelled to reach out. Emails arrived from strangers thanking the family for their strength, apologizing for losses they had never caused. The gestures were kind, well-intentioned, but exhausting. Empathy, when repeated endlessly, could feel like erosion. The family learned to set boundaries, to protect the fragile peace they had assembled. They redirected attention toward causes that mattered to them, supported organizations focused on victims' rights, on investigative reform. Their advocacy was deliberate, measured, rooted in lived experience rather than abstract outrage. As the years passed, technology continued its relentless advance. Methods once considered cutting-edge became standard, then obsolete. The Florida case, once a triumph of modern forensics, risked becoming outdated even in its success. New cases would be solved faster, with greater certainty, and the shock of delayed justice would feel less dramatic by comparison. This prospect carried its own quiet hope, that future families would not have to wait decades, that the lessons learned would compress time rather than stretch it, that cold cases might grow warmer sooner, before memory thinned and witnesses vanished. Yet optimism was tempered by realism. Resources remained finite, backlogs persisted, human bias still shaped investigations. The Florida case had not fixed the system, it had merely illuminated a path. Walking it required sustained commitment, not just inspiration. In one jurisdiction, budget cuts threatened to halt a cold case unit. During a tense council meeting, a citizen spoke up, referencing Florida 1989. The room shifted. Numbers were reconsidered. The unit survived. No press release followed. No one tracked the ripple effect. But somewhere, another file stayed open because a solved case had made complacency harder to defend. The passage of time introduced a new complication. Memory itself became suspect. Witness recollections faded. Context blurred. The Florida case had benefited from physical evidence that endured where memory could not. Others would not be so fortunate. This reality underscored the urgency of early, thorough investigation, of documentation that anticipated future doubt. Academics began studying the psychological toll of unresolved cases on communities. Florida featured prominently. Surveys revealed long-term impacts on trust, on perceptions of safety, on civic engagement. Solving the case had improved some measures, but not all. Closure, it turned out, was unevenly distributed. Some healed faster. Others carried scars that resisted resolution. The findings challenged simplistic narratives. Justice was not a switch that flipped from off to on. It was a spectrum influenced by timing, communication, acknowledgement. The Florida case had achieved legal closure, but emotional closure varied, fractured by individual experience. As anniversaries continued to pass, commemorations grew smaller, more intimate. Candles still appeared at the memorial, but fewer each year. Silence reclaimed the space. The absence of spectacle felt appropriate, even respectful. Grief no longer needed witnesses. And yet, in quiet moments, the question persisted. What if the evidence had been tested sooner? What if assumptions had been challenged earlier? These questions had no answers, only implications. They served as cautionary tales rather than accusations, guiding future choices through the lens of regret. The Florida 1989 cold case settled into its final role. Not a headline, not a mystery, but a reference point, invoked whenever someone needed proof that waiting did not equal forgetting, that truth could survive neglect, that systems could learn if forced to confront their own inertia. In the end, the case did not demand remembrance through repetition. It asked for remembrance through action, through vigilance, through the refusal to let silence stand in for certainty. Somewhere tonight, an investigator opens a box. A family waits for a call. A piece of evidence sits untouched. The Florida case does not hover dramatically over these moments. It whispers instead, a low, persistent reminder that time is not neutral, that every delay carries weight, that every decision leaves a mark. And in that whisper lies the unfinished work, the ongoing tension between what was lost and what can still be saved. The cold case may be solved, but its story continues not in files or courts, but in the choices made by those who learned from it, quietly, deliberately, one decision at a time. There is a moment that comes long after the verdict, long after the headlines fade, when a solved case begins to behave like an unsolved one again. Not because the facts have changed, but because the meaning keeps shifting. The Florida 1989 cold case entered that phase quietly. No alarms. No breaking news banners. Just a gradual return of uncertainty, not about who did it, but about what the truth had cost and what it had repaired. In the archives of the Sheriff's Department, the case file was moved one last time. Not to evidence, not to active investigations, but to a section marked, closed, significant. It sat among other folders with similar labels, each one representing years of unanswered questions that eventually collided with technology, persistence, or chance. The classification felt ceremonial, almost symbolic. Closure, stamped in ink. But nothing about the case had ever been simple enough to be sealed with a label. New investigators, fresh from the academy, were sometimes brought into the records room and shown the file. Not as a warning, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. This is what patience looks like. This is what evidence can do when people don't give up on it. And this is what happens when time becomes both enemy and ally. They flipped through pages filled with handwriting from another era. Typed reports with fading ink. Diagrams drawn before digital mapping existed. Notes that captured assumptions no one remembered making. The past felt tactile here, heavy in a way no database could replicate. For many of them, 1989 was an abstraction, a date that lived only in textbooks. But in this folder, it breathed. One trainee paused over a photograph, grainy and imperfect, the kind of image that once defined the limits of investigation. He asked whether anyone had suspected the convicted man back then. The answer was complicated. There had been moments, doubts, threads that never quite connected. Suspicion had drifted in and out like weather, never settling long enough to harden into action. Without the DNA match, the case would likely still be cold, a question mark preserved in cardboard and tape. That realization carried weight. It underscored how fragile certainty could be, how dependent justice was on tools that did not always exist when needed. The solved case did not erase the decades before it. It illuminated them, exposing how close the truth had come to being lost permanently. Outside law enforcement, the case began to appear in classrooms. Criminal justice students debated it. Ethics courses dissected it. Psychology programs analyzed the long-term impact on families and suspects alike. Each discipline claimed a piece of the narrative, reframing it to fit their lens. The story multiplied, fractured into interpretations that sometimes conflicted, sometimes overlapped. The victim's name became a case study identifier. The year turned into a shorthand reference. This abstraction was useful for learning, but it risked stripping away humanity. Professors who understood that danger made a point to remind students that this was not a hypothetical. This had been a person, a family, a community that lived with uncertainty for decades. For the family, this academic afterlife felt distant. They did not attend conferences or read journals. Their connection to the case was visceral, not theoretical. They measured time differently, in memories and absences rather than semesters and citations. Still, they understood that if their loss could prevent future ones, there was value in allowing the story to circulate. They chose their moments carefully. A rare interview here, a closed-door meeting there. Always controlled, always deliberate. They spoke about waiting, about the corrosive nature of not knowing, about how hope could feel like both lifeline and burden. Their words were calm, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. Justice delayed does not pause pain. It stretches it. The convicted man's appeals continued, as appeals often do, grinding forward in procedural increments. Each filing reopened wounds for the family, stirred debate in legal circles, generated small flares of attention that quickly died down. Nothing about the appeals suggested an imminent reversal. The DNA evidence remained solid, unshaken by argument. Still, the process served as a reminder that finality in the justice system was always provisional, subject to challenge, interpretation, revision. Within the prison, the man aged further into anonymity. New inmates arrived who had never heard of the Florida case. Guards rotated. Administrations changed. His notoriety thinned with time, replaced by the mundane realities of incarceration. He became less symbol, more statistic. Yet somewhere in the system, his file still carried the weight of history, a solved cold case that refused to fully settle. Journalists occasionally revisited the story, usually on anniversaries or during broader discussions about forensic breakthroughs. They struggled to find new angles. The facts were stable, the outcome known. What remained was atmosphere, the lingering sense of unease that clung to any story where decades separated crime from consequence. Some reporters focused on the miracle of science. Others emphasized the failures that allowed the case to go cold in the first place. A few questioned whether the conviction, though supported by DNA, fully accounted for every unanswered detail. These pieces did not reopen the case legally, but they kept it alive culturally, ensuring it was not forgotten or simplified into a morality play with a neat ending. In the community, reactions were mixed. Some residents felt pride that the case had finally been solved, that their town's name was no longer synonymous with mystery and fear. Others felt a quiet resentment, a sense that reopening the past had disturbed a fragile equilibrium. Not everyone wanted closure if it meant reliving old trauma. Local officials learned to navigate these tensions carefully. Memorials were maintained but not expanded. Public statements were restrained. There was an unspoken agreement to let the case rest without erasing it. Memory was preserved, but not amplified. As years passed, the Florida case began to intersect with others in unexpected ways. A new cold case was solved in another state using similar techniques. Investigators cited Florida as precedent. A funding bill referenced the case in its supporting documents. A nonprofit organization used it as an example in grant proposals. The story functioned like connective tissue, linking disparate efforts under a shared understanding that time did not have to be the final word. This interconnectedness created a strange paradox. The more the case influenced the future, the more it receded from the present. It became infrastructure rather than narrative, a foundational element that supported progress without demanding attention. This was perhaps its most profound transformation. For the family, moments of peace arrived unexpectedly. A day without thinking about the case. A laugh unshadowed by memory. These moments did not feel like betrayal. They felt earned. Healing, they discovered, did not require forgetting. It required permission to live beyond the story. Yet even in peace, the question lingered. What does justice look like after 30 years? Is it a conviction, an apology, a lesson learned? Or is it simply the absence of doubt, the end of wondering who did this and why? The Florida case offered no single answer. It suggested that justice was layered, incomplete, evolving. That solving a cold case did not rewind time or restore what was lost. It clarified one truth while leaving others untouched. As new technologies emerged, genetic genealogy, advanced data modeling, the case was occasionally mentioned as a stepping stone, a marker along the path of innovation. It reminded professionals that every breakthrough stood on the shoulders of previous ones, that progress was cumulative, built from patience as much as brilliance. And so the story continued, not as a headline, not as a mystery, but as a quiet presence shaping decisions, informing ethics, influencing practice. The Florida 1989 cold case had crossed a threshold. It was no longer about what happened then. It was about what happened after. Some nights, in the town where it all began, the streets were empty and still. The past felt distant, almost unreal. But somewhere, in an office or a lab or a classroom, someone was thinking about that case, drawing from it, guided by it. The echo was faint, but persistent. Time had not erased the crime. It had transformed it, stretched it across decades, woven it into the fabric of countless other stories. The case was solved, yes, but its influence remained unresolved, ongoing. A reminder that the pursuit of truth did not end with an answer. It only changed direction. And in that ongoing pursuit, the Florida case continued to speak. Not loudly, not urgently, but with the steady insistence of something that had waited a long time to be heard, and would not be easily silenced again.